Tonight on Bridge City News, the Alberta budget officially came down. We have reaction from many groups discussing the impact of the upcoming cuts. Firefighters in Lethbridge were training new recruits today on more life-saving techniques. And wildfires are ravaging many areas of both northern and southern California, forcing thousands of people to evacuate.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The government of Alberta laid out its $58.7 billion plan to deal with the province's deficit, and many people will feel the effect. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney promised spending cuts of 2.8% over the next 4 years. That will mean there will be post-secondary school tuition increases, cutting hundreds of civil service jobs, and some cuts to municipalities. The budget does allow for an increase of 1% for health care. Money for infrastructure projects, including transit programs for Calgary and Edmonton, however, will be delayed. Finance Minister Travis Toews says the steps are needed to balance the books by 2023, which is just before the next provincial election.
This budget actually reduces spending. And the previous government's budgets, even though revenues were flat, spending kept going up at a significant pace. What we have to do is we have to get to a balanced budget. We have to get to a balanced budget, which this plan does. And at that point in time, as a province, as Albertans, we have to work at paying it down. An approach that ensures that we're continuing to deliver high-quality services in education and health. An approach that ensures that we're continuing to look after and care for our most vulnerable. And yet an approach that will bring us to balance as a province by 22-23, which was our commitment to voters last spring.
Even with the cuts, the UCP is still projecting an $8.7 billion deficit this year. The new budget was met with both cheers and jeers. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business and the Calgary Chamber of Commerce say the plan is exactly what our province needs right now. The opposition NDP say corporate tax breaks and changes to personal income tax where people pay more will not create jobs. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says public service workers are already spread too thin and cuts will affect services people heavily rely on.
And these are services that are already under stress because they haven't been filling positions, they haven't been staffing up to the level of demand, and this is going to make it even worse. So our members are getting angry because all they want to do is be able to provide good services to the people of this province, and it's becoming harder and harder to do that. So we're concerned obviously about direct layoffs, and we'll be keeping an eye out for where those are. But in the meantime, it's going to get harder and harder on the front lines for our members to provide services.
The AUP represents about 96,000 frontline government workers. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman spoke about the new Alberta budget and the need for more funding for law enforcement, rehabilitation, and prosecution.
There's $40 million outlined for the opioid response, and even though there are no specifics yet on where this will be invested, it's important that Lethbridge receives its fair share for treatment and recovery programs, as we are a community that has demonstrated great need on this issue. There's $50 million dedicated to law enforcement, along with 50 new prosecutors and programs to reduce crime. We want to make sure that Lethbridge receives funding for prosecutors so that crimes are prosecuted on a timely basis. We also hope that that means a translation into funding for the needed scan resources in our community so that we can shut down the drug houses and stop the supply of drugs flowing into our community.
Spearman says he hopes to dive deeper into the provincial budget in the near future to learn more about what it means for the city of Lethbridge. With the new budget, overall funds to advanced education for Campus Alberta grants will be reduced by 5%. President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Lethbridge, Mike Mann, spoke earlier today about how the new Alberta budget will impact the U of L and its students.
Any significant budget reduction like this will feel significant. And so what that means, though, in terms of the specifics, I think is too early to say. But yes, I mean, a 3.2% reduction in our operating grant, 4.2% loss of IMP funding for 1 year. Those are significant numbers if you look at our overall budget. But having said that, we know as a university we'll figure out a path forward that will ensure that we continue to be successful as a university. So while it will be significant, it is not insurmountable in terms of our ability to deal with it, and we will deal with it.
The recent government cuts will be challenging for both the college and students. That's the sentiment from Lethbridge College President Dr. Paula Burns. Dr. Burns says the college will review the changes and will work to ensure that post-secondary education remains affordable and accessible for all Albertans. Burns says they will begin their internal budget planning process over the next few days as they receive more details about their operating grant from the Ministry of Advanced Education. Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services continued their new recruit training program, but this time with a twist. BCN's Loris Alexander spoke with the fire chief, who said today's course was meant to put a firefighter into difficult situations in order to learn how to maintain composure under stress.
The confidence maze is a maze, and it's designed to simulate some of the sort of emergency situations a firefighter could find himself in inside a structure.
It's simulated by blocking the trainees' masks, and then they go through a series of obstacles in the maze while still wearing their gear.
We want to make sure our firefighters are safe when they go into any type of structure, and to do that, we need to simulate some of the events that they might encounter. If we can train them to all the emergencies, we're hoping that the standard work that they do will become less anxiety, less stress for them.
It was a good experience going through the maze. It's always good to get used to getting in a tough spot like that, trying to get your body figured out so you can get out in a tricky spot if you never know when you're going to get it put into one of those.
Rathwell says they try to increase anxiety and stress while they go through the maze.
We've got elevation changes, so they go up and down through floors. When they're actually moving along the floors, we narrow the hallway. So what they're crawling through all of a sudden becomes half the size or a little bit less.
You got to really learn how to maneuver, get your body as small as you can, suck in a lot.
The trainees are nearing the end of a 12-week program and graduate on November 19th. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Chinook Hospital hosted its fall cleanup earlier today. People of all ages gathered to rake leaves and tidy up trash around the hospital. One girl says volunteer opportunities like these are a good way to get your foot in the door.
My parents are both doctors, and ever since I was a little kid, I went to work with them, and I just saw them working, and it just kind of inspired me to help other people. And so it sort of inspired me to also choose my career and which field I want to work in. So ever since I found out about what they do and everything, I started working towards my goal and becoming a physician like them.
The next annual cleanup will take place sometime in the spring. After edging out the Red Deer Rebels 4-3 on Thursday, the Lethbridge Hurricanes headed into today's game looking for their 6th straight win. Canes defenseman Kalen Addison spoke about a sense of swagger and confidence the team has with a hot start to the season.
You know, we're at the top again, and we want to keep going higher. So, like I said, we've made a name for ourselves again, and that's what we want to do around here. Anytime you can win and put together a bunch of wins in a row is huge, and it helps your confidence for sure every day.
Yeah, it feels great. Got lots of confidence in our young guys and all around the room, and we have a pretty good team here that works hard, and we get the job done.
Tonight's game against the Brandon Wheat Kings will be the first of 4 meetings between the two. International Trade Minister Jim Carr says he has begun chemotherapy and dialysis for a form of blood cancer that is also affecting his kidneys. He says his spirits remain high as he's begun treatments for multiple myeloma. Carr experienced flu-like symptoms during the election campaign, and on Monday, his doctor ordered him to the hospital. He was diagnosed with cancer the very next day. Carr said he spoke with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about his commitment to keep serving his constituents in Winnipeg and all Canadians. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says he believes it's possible for him to hold socially conservative views and be Prime Minister. He was asked if someone should become PM if they are pro-life and not in favor of same-sex marriage.
I've always been open and honest with my own personal views on any number of issues. What I was saying during the campaign is that the leader of a party has to focus on things that unite us, and it's in our party platform that a Conservative government will not reopen the debate on that issue, and I respect that. I respect the decision that our members have taken at conventions, and my commitment to Canadians was that twofold. We'll always fight to make sure that Canada is a country where you can hold different viewpoints, but that the government will not be reopening that or changing laws or changing access, because it is an issue that divides Canadians, it divides Conservatives. And so I believe that you can have both of those positions, that you can have a personal view and you can acknowledge that in Canada.
Green Party leader Elizabeth May said she sent letters to many of the other party leaders outlining how to make progress in the upcoming session of Parliament. May says the Greens will not support the Trudeau Liberals in a confidence motion if there's no movement to increase our country's climate change targets.
We cannot vote confidence at any point on a confidence motion in a government that fails to have a climate target that's grounded in science and consistent with what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we must do. That's clear. So I wanted to underscore for Prime Minister Trudeau and for other opposition leaders, and especially for civil society organizations that are looking for ways to push this government to make a difference, that Canada needs to change our climate target before December 2nd. That is the next negotiation. It's COP25 in Santiago, Chile. And I think it's important to underscore that there is no need for Parliament to meet for Trudeau to remove the Harper target.
With a minority government, many Canadians are wondering if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be able to play well with the other federal party leaders. Our national parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, believes Trudeau can.
I think that Mr. Trudeau can get along with some of the opposition parties. He can work with the Bloc. He can work with the NDP on environmental issues. He can work with the Conservatives to achieve things like the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. As a matter of fact, he said that's one of his priorities, TMX. So we're probably going to be speculating a lot as to whether or not we'll have an election sooner rather than later.
Monsieur Fillion will also discuss if both Andrew Scheer and Jagmeet Singh should be replaced as leaders of their parties. That's coming up after business news. After spending time at Jasper National Park, Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg announced in a tweet that she's arrived in Vancouver. Rain and powerful winds were forecast for rally in the city earlier today. Public school students scheduled a day off from classes to join in the rally, which was being called the Post-Election Youth Climate Strike. A lawsuit has been filed in federal court on behalf of 15 youths who say young Canadians are suffering the effects of climate change. All 15 spoke at a news conference in Vancouver about why they're taking the legal action, including a 13-year-old Indigenous girl from Saskatchewan who said she did not want to die before she could live. One of the lawyers said this suit is not about money damages, but about forcing the government to implement a credible recovery plan. Around 50,000 people are under evacuation orders in areas around Los Angeles due to wind-whipped wildfires. Government officials say the strong winds are expected to continue.
Currently, we're estimating the fire to be at 3,950 acres plus with zero containment. And we have over 500 firefighters on the incident right now, and we had approximately 10,000 structures that were impacted by the incident. As mentioned earlier, we do have several structures that have been damaged or destroyed. We're expecting stronger winds tonight into tomorrow morning. Do not be lulled by the fact that you may not see open flames right now, because there are plenty of hot spots out in the incident. We'll have firefighters out all night trying to work on those hot spots and try to work on increasing our containment line.
Meanwhile, officials ordered 2,000 people to evacuate in Northern California. A wildfire in the region's wine country exploded in size, which prompted utilities throughout the state to impose electrical blackouts to prevent even more wildfires.
Well, around 6:30, the highway patrol showed up, banging on the door, ordering everyone to evacuate because the fire was so close. It started around 10:30 last night, and at that time it was like 500 acres. And by the time I woke up this morning, it was a lot more, about 10,000, I believe.
You know, I think that since the fires are an issue, everybody has to try to do what they can. I think that people feeling inconvenienced is I guess, part of the new normal. It'd sure be nice if stuff didn't start on fire, and I don't think that piling on PG&E is necessarily the answer.
And at 1:30 in the morning, I woke up and the mountain was on fire. And so I woke up my husband and we checked it out, and it was across the river. You know, we'd like to move, of course, but where are you going to move? There's disaster everywhere, so.
Police in the United Kingdom say they've arrested 2 men and a woman in connection with the 39 deaths of people who were found inside of a truck container at an industrial area in Essex. Authorities originally believed all of the dead were Chinese nationals, but they are now saying that Vietnamese nationals were also inside of the truck. The 25-year-old Northern Irish truck driver, identified as Mo Robinson, remains in custody, as is a 48-year-old man who's also from Northern Ireland. There's some terrific new movies playing at the Mill this weekend, including the film The Art of Racing in the Rain. With more now, here's Len Binning with another Movie Mill Minute.
Renee Zellweger plays the role of Judy Garland in this biopic film. It's been 30 years since she starred in The Wizard of Oz, and now in 1968, she's come to London for one last gig.
I don't have a home. I can't even get a manager.
London would offer you a lot of money. Talk of the town is desperate to do a deal with you.
You're saying I have to leave my children if I want to make enough money to be with my children? I would very much like to stay.
The Art of Racing in the Rain is a touching story narrated by a witty and philosophical dog by the name of Enzo, narrated by Kevin Costner. It's the story of Danny and the loves of his life, his wife, his daughter, and of course, his best friend, Enzo.
No one knows what curves life will throw at you. But if a driver has the courage to create his own conditions, then the rain is simply rain. But for now, all I want is one more lap. Faster, Denny. Faster.
Disney's back at it, taking their most beloved cartoons and turning them into live action, this time with The Lion King. Director Jon Favreau does an amazing job with CGI. You won't be able to tell the difference between the actual animals and the CGI generated.
You must take your place in the circle of life.
Terrific family movies at the Mill once again. A beautiful, warm fall-like day in the city today, but don't get too comfortable. Cooler temperatures are on the way just in time for the weekend. Complete weather details are coming up. We received a report of winds exceeding 150 kilometers an hour in Nanton earlier today, and a grass fire west of Cayley, which is too being fueled by the winds. Also lots of cloud cover and spotty showers in some regions of southwestern Alberta. Tonight, more rain developing or even snow with a low near -2. Tomorrow, a chance of flurries again with a high of only +1. Sunday, mostly cloudy with a high again near 1 degree. Monday, more snow developing with the mercury dropping to -6. Tuesday, -6 again, but a high pressure system returns, clearing out the clouds. Wednesday, warming up to a balmy 10 degrees and only 1 degree cooler on Thursday. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 11 degrees with an average low of -2. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1990 at 24 degrees, and the record low was a cold -21 in 1939. Sunrise was at 8:08, sunset at 6:23. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria and Vancouver had a wind warning earlier today. Tomorrow, expect a few clouds and a high near 12 in both cities. A chance of flurries and a high of 0 in Calgary tomorrow. Edmonton had a wind warning today. Tomorrow, flurries and a high near -1. Regina should be mainly cloudy and +2. Flurries and -1 for Saskatoon tomorrow. Just a few clouds and 10 degrees for Winnipeg. Sunshine and 11 for both Toronto and Ottawa. Just a few clouds and 12 degrees for Montreal on Saturday. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick should receive rain and 9. Showers and 10 degrees for both Halifax, Nova Scotia and Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 7 degrees for tomorrow. Alberta's budget is giving a break to healthcare and education funding, but takes a big stick to civil servants and cities. The first budget from the UCP projects a deficit of $8.7 billion on $50 billion in revenue for 2019-2020. Debt is projected to rise to $72 billion by next spring. The budget paves the way for post-secondary tuition increases and the elimination of hundreds of civil service jobs. Cuts will also be coming to various municipalities. Infrastructure projects, including transit programs for Calgary and Edmonton, will be delayed. The budget forecasts shrinking deficits in the next 2 years before getting back to black by the year 2023. New figures from the Federal Finance Department show the federal government ran a deficit of $5.2 billion over the first 5 months of the current fiscal year. Program expenses jumped 9.1% or $10.9 billion compared to last year. Government revenues rose 2.9% or $3.9 billion from the same period last year. It was mostly based on higher personal income tax revenues and $18 million generated by the federal portion of cannabis taxes. Alberta's Crown-owned bank says the province is the leader when it comes to the development of legal retail cannabis markets. ATB Financial says the government has issued more than 280 licenses for retail cannabis stores. It says while the black market still exists, $170 million in retail pot sales were recorded in Alberta between October of 2018 and August of this year. ATB says Calgary and Edmonton accounted for almost 62% of provincial sales in August. With a total of 500 retail licenses expected to be in place in Alberta by 2021, legal sales are forecast to increase. The results of the ratification votes by striking General Motors workers in the United States will be released very soon. But workers at the GM factory with the most employees approved a new contract by a margin of 78%. That all but assures the deal will be ratified, and a 40-day strike that also idled thousands of Canadian workers due to part shortages will come to an end. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 35 points on the day to 16,404. The Dow was up 152 points to 26,958. The S&P 500 was up 12 points to 3,022, and the Nasdaq was up 57 points to 8243. Oil was up 43 cents on the day to 56.66 per barrel. Natural gas was unchanged at $2.32. Gold was up 40 cents to $15.04 per ounce, and silver was up 23 cents to $18.04 per ounce. Wheat is at $222 per metric ton, barley's at $216, canola's at $454, and corn is at $281 per metric ton. Live cattle was up $1.55 to $112.10. Feeder cattle was up 48 cents to $146.40. Lean hogs were up 3 cents to $76.30, and the Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 76.57 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the government of Alberta laid out its $58.7 billion plan to deal with the province's deficit. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney promised spending cuts of 2.8% over the next 4 years. That will mean there will be post-secondary school tuition increases, cutting hundreds of civil service jobs, and some cuts to municipalities. The budget does allow for an increase of 1% for health care. Money for infrastructure projects, including transit programs for Calgary and Edmonton, however, will be delayed. Even with the cuts, the UCP is still projecting an $8.7 billion deficit for this year. Two of the worst countries in the world when it comes to persecuting Christians are Pakistan and Algeria. Now that's according to Greg Musselman, who's a spokesperson with Voice of the Martyrs. Watch my full interview with Mr. Musselman next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Pitcher Butte Trinity United Church is holding its annual Fall Beef Supper fundraiser on Sunday, October 27th from 5 to 7 p.m. at the Pitcher Butte Community Center. Dine in or take out. Tickets are $20 and are available at the door. To purchase your tickets in advance, visit the Pitcher Butte Municipal Library. The United Way Coats for Kids and Families campaign continues until October 31st, accepting new and gently used winter wear for families in need in the community. Accepted items include new or gently used coats, mittens, scarves, snow pants, snow boots, and new hats and toques. Items can be dropped off at United Way and any Lethbridge TD Canada Trust or ATB Financial branch. For more information, call 403-327-1700. Come out and support a worthy cause. The 5th annual Pig Roast fundraiser in support of the construction of a medical clinic in Uganda is taking place Saturday, November 2nd at Miss City Church. The evening will include a delicious pork dinner and program. Doors will open at 5 p.m. Tickets are $15 and can be purchased at the Bridges of Hope office by calling 403-380-3844. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Living in Canada, we sometimes face severe challenges in living out our Christian faith, but compared to what takes place in other countries around the world, we have much to be thankful for. Today, we're going to hear some of the stories of Christians going through extreme difficulty, and we'll also hear how we can help out. Joining me now from St. Albert, Alberta, is Greg Musselman, spokesperson for Voice of the Martyrs. Greg, welcome back to BCN.
Hey, it's good to be with you again.
Greg, let's talk about the persecution of Christians in Pakistan. How bad is it there right now for believers?
Well, it's extremely difficult. Now, it all depends on what area of the country that you live in. In some of the rural areas, it's very dangerous. And even in some of the city areas like Lahore, where I've been several times, where churches are attacked and, Christians are, arrested. One of the things, Hal, that goes on is this blasphemy law. And often it's used against Christians. There's less than 2% of the population of Pakistan is Christian. Majority, of course, is Muslim. It's the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So it's very difficult for Christians there. And anytime there's like a land grab kind of situation, Christians will be accused of blasphemy. They're put in prison. Of course, we all know the story of Asia Bibi, who spent many years in prison in Pakistan. Of course, now she's here in Canada. But Asia is here and in freedom finally after all that time in prison. Many of our brothers and sisters in Christ are suffering. Now, this past weekend, I was up in Sioux Lookout, Ontario, and I met several families there. And one of the men that I talked to, he actually was going to be arrested for blasphemy. He was fortunate enough to escape the country, did spend several years in a detention center in Bangkok, Thailand, but now he's in Canada. And he was sharing with me over the weekend about how his cousin, who is a young guy, he's got several children, and he's married, and he was put in prison for blasphemy. And he's very concerned. We're going to try to find out ways, to be able to maybe be in touch with this young man and encourage him. But they live with this every day. There's, again, there's not only the attacks that we hear when explosions take place in churches, many killed, but, also just the everyday living in a culture that, for the most part, is against the people that follow Jesus.
Are there some areas of Pakistan that are more free than others, or is it basically dangerous everywhere throughout the country?
Well, there's pockets. I mean, you can be in a big city like Lahore, Karachi, some of those spots, and in some neighborhoods, there's relatively no violence. But one of the things that the believers that I talked to on the weekend said is, yeah, things can be going along, but there's always that potential of things happening. In rural areas, where the Christians are often forced, to be involved in the brick kilns, even the young children, to the adults, they're under severe persecution. They're forced into this slave labor. And, so again, as you go through the country, and it's a fairly large country, a very broken country politically and otherwise, is the challenge, though, for the Christians is that they just don't know when things could happen. One of the families that I was privileged to be sort of the go-between, I was contacted on Facebook by this brother named Saran. And, he told me of his situation, and he was at that point in these detention centers in Thailand. And I said, well, why did you leave the country? Because one of the things that with Voice of the Martyrs is we really encourage the Christians to stay in the country, because if everybody leaves, where is the salt and light and to be able to share the message of Jesus? And I understand that, from a Voice of the Martyrs perspective. But as a dad, knowing that this, Saran and his wife, Charmine, have two young daughters, and because they were involved with a Christian school in their area, that one day militant Islamists came up to the door and said, if you don't stop, we're going to kidnap your daughter. And that for them was the last straw. They packed up their bags with some help from friends. They made their way to Thailand, and that it was an ordeal in itself, but at least they escaped the country. So, I mean, this is the situation facing Christians all the time. And, you're in a church on a Sunday morning. You and I don't have to worry about a bomb exploding, but that is the pressure that they're living under there.
Is the Christian church shrinking in numbers with all of this persecution, Greg?
Well, that's hard to know, Hal, because we know that thousands, as an example, have left Pakistan for countries like Thailand, some in Malaysia, and then making their way to Canada, the United States, Australia, and some of those other places. But definitely the message of the gospel is going forward. And, we work in Pakistan. I've had the opportunity of, teaching at the Bible College and documenting stories of persecution. But the thing that's quite interesting is, you would have those that maybe have a long history. Their grandparents were Christians and their parents were Christians. They're Christians now, and they're leaving the country. On the other hand, many of the people that I've talked to and that we work with are Muslim background people. They've had dreams and visions of Jesus, or somebody has shared the message of God's love with them. There's through radio and television. Even programs like 100 Huntley Street that I'm involved in, stories go into these places and they're able to hear the message of the gospel, because we have people here in Canada that have converted from Islam into Christianity, and they're sharing their stories. So we know that the message is getting out there. And, to answer your question, is it in big numbers? Well, it's hard to know because many of these Muslim converts have to be very careful. They don't want their neighbors, their friends, their imam finding out that they've converted from Islam to Christianity. So a lot of them have to be, in secret and have to be very careful.
So the Christians in these volatile countries where they're being persecuted, are they somehow able to extend forgiveness to those who are persecuting them?
That is one of the things that is amazing to me, whether it's Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines or Indonesia, wherever we have traveled, and I've met believers, Ethiopia. And, you hear the stories, the horrible things that have happened, like in Nigeria, there's thousands and thousands of widows, Christian, families where the husband has been killed. Some of the children have been killed. And, as I'm doing the interviews and then I come to that part of the, where I ask the question, okay, these horrible things have happened. I understand how you would be angry and maybe you'd say, I don't want to forgive. I'll ask the question, have you been able to forgive? And as long as there's been some time passed, because, they're human just like us, not superhuman Christians. It takes time to process that. But they go back to what Jesus says, to love your enemies, to forgive those that have persecuted you. And so, in most of the time, the people we've talked to in the interviews have said yes, because Jesus has said that we forgive and we are going to do that. Again, with everybody, it could be a long period of time. I've talked to, a lady, in the Palestinian Authority, in Gaza, where her husband, who worked in the Bible Society, he was murdered. And it took many years before she was finally able to forgive. And then once she was able to forgive, then the Lord opened up doors of ministry. So you know what? I would say most of the people that we've talked to, again, they've had a process to be able to work through it. In some cases, like in Pakistan, and talk to some of these young Christian girls that have been, sexually assaulted and in some cases forced to marriage, convert to Islam, they've escaped. And you say, are you able to forgive? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, we've been able to forgive. Others are saying, I'm still in process. I know what the Bible teaches, but I'm still trying to work on it.
Now, Greg, you mentioned Aja Bibi earlier. Any update on how she's doing with her family? And maybe give our viewers a little bit of background on her story?
Well, Asia Bibi was arrested, more than 10 years ago. She was charged with blasphemy. She was working in a field with Muslim women. She's a Christian. And, she was having a drink of water and she offered her cup to another person that was working. And they said, no, you're an infidel, and all that kind of thing. And it erupted into some argument. What was said, we're, not totally sure. Asia says she did not, blaspheme Muhammad or the Quran or Muslim people. She just merely stated her Christian beliefs. And for that, she was arrested, spent many years in jail. She was given the death sentence. It was overturned. And then, a year or so ago, she was told that she was, had been exonerated and she was able to leave the country. That caused, the militant Islamists then to start getting all angry and protesting. And of course, the government was afraid that there'd be riots and people would be killed. Eventually, she was, able to get out of the country. She's in Canada now. I've only seen one interview that she's granted so far. It was in print. She's still fearful. She's here in Canada somewhere, and she's actually been reunited with her children, and we thank the Lord for that. A lot of pressure was put on the government of Pakistan, including our Canadian government, and we're grateful for their getting involved and getting her released. She's now talking about at some point that she would like to go to Europe, but at least we know for now she's safe. And, just trying to recover, too. I mean, you can't imagine what she's been through. And she's grateful, though, and she says she misses Pakistan. And I think I would miss Canada if I was in another country as well. But even all that she went through, she knows that's probably never going to happen. But for now, she's safe.
The South American country, Colombia, is not usually a place thought of where Christians would be persecuted. But, Greg, that is definitely the case. Can you explain what's going on there?
Well, Hal, there was a time, 10, 15 years ago where the highest number of pastors being killed, for their faith was in Colombia. Now, we're familiar with a group called FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. They're a guerrilla organization. They, trying to bring equality into society. Well, in order to fund what they were doing, they got into the drug trade. They also got into kidnappings, and they caused massive destruction in the country, controlling about a third of Colombia. Now, most of it was in the rural areas, and they destroyed all churches. Now, the reason that Christians were so persecuted is that the pastors were in their churches saying, you don't join these guys. They're killers, they're terrorists, they're involved in the drug trade, they're poisoning people. And so as a result of that, the FARC would then go after the pastors. They see them, of course, as the leaders. And the FARC and the paramilitary, which is on the right side, also involved in terrorism. And then you've got your military. Well, they work, under an army kind of scenario, military scenario. So they take out the general, would be the pastor of the church. So Christians have endured a lot. I mean, the country itself has been, a lot of warfare, a lot of death, but Christians particularly targeted. The people that we've been working with are like up in the Andes Mountains. These are indigenous believers. And the reason they suffer persecution is because you've got the communists, that kind of thing. You've got a mix of Catholicism and paganism. It's a mess. And so for those that say, you know what, I want to follow Jesus, they understand the message of the gospel, the good news, God sent his son into the earth, and they came in relationship with him. And then as a result of that, when they read the Bible, they say we can't be participating in these kind of evil practices. So that gets them into trouble, and they are driven from their communities. When we were there just recently, I was down there with a team from 100 Huntley Street, and we went into the Andes Mountains and met with a number of believers that have been persecuted. A young lady there, at the time she was like 18 years old. Her name is Letty. And she was, beaten up by family members, which was terrible. And so we heard many stories like Letty's, her mom, and others that have suffered because of their Christian faith. So part of what we're doing, Voice of the Martyrs and Crossroads 100 Huntley Street, is actually to build a village from scratch. We've done it one other time in another part of the southern area of Colombia. And so we're helping these believers there. But they have these stories of the difficulties they've gone through. And we've talked to others that, if they've been, in part of the FARC and some other areas of Colombia, that they're often targeted because now they're seen as enemies.
Algeria is a country in North Africa located between Morocco and Libya. Now, that's also a country known to persecute Christians. Is a lot of that to do with the government and the culture there, Greg?
Yeah, and actually, and maybe you'll be able to even run this video that we've been able to, get from our friends in Algeria, is police officers actually went into a church, and it was one of the largest Protestant church, actually full gospel church in Algeria. And the police came in. Of course, everybody has got their cell phones and video, and they're videoing as the police officers, enter into this church of more than 800 people and say, you don't have authorization to be able to be meeting here and having worship services. And but the people were singing, they were worshiping the Lord. And then the pastor there, Sila, got up and said, to the police officers and the congregation, respectfully, he said, you know what, we are doing this because we have the right to be able to do this. And this is how we answer your, trying to close us down, as we worship and praise God. And Algeria is a country that is listed as more than 99% Muslim. And so there's not a lot of Christians in Algeria. And they've, up until recently, they've, had, relative freedom to be able to worship, but that has now changed. And so several of the churches, the larger churches, and we're not talking thousands and thousands, 800 being the largest one, is that they're being closed down, and the government says you're not allowed to meet. And, and the Christians are saying, well, yes, we are. And then what they do is they pour wax into the locks so they can't get into the building. But you and I know that, the church is not the building, it's the people. And, they're trying to show the love of Jesus, fighting back in prayer and trying to show love in the midst of the situations that they're going through. But I've been very impressed, what the reports I've had, and we work in that, northern part of Africa, is the response has been in a way that's not in a violent way or anything like that, but just saying, okay, we're going to worship our God, and they're just believing that the Lord is going to intervene. That's why we need to be praying.
Greg Musselman, spokesperson with Voice of the Martyrs, thanks so much for joining me today from St. Albert, Alberta.
Hey, Hal, always good to see you, and thanks for the opportunity.
The federal election wrapped up, and now there appears to be more division than ever, especially between the federal Liberals and the Prairie provinces. Joining me now to discuss this is our national parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion, who joins me once again from Ottawa. First of all, Ray, welcome back.
Thanks, Hal. It's good to be back, indeed.
Right, let's talk about the strong message Trudeau received in regards to his minority government. He failed to capture any seats in either Alberta or Saskatchewan. How can he mend those fences with many here in the prairies?
It was quite the rebuke that he suffered on Monday night, especially from a prime minister who in 2015 branded himself as a great unifier, a man who brings people together. Now, as you said, the country is more divided than ever, perhaps, with the prairies all blue, Quebec red and blue bloc, separatists are back. In Ottawa in large numbers. They went up from 10 MPs to 30. Ontario is mostly liberal yet again. So yeah, quite the interesting scenario. Justin Trudeau held a news conference on Wednesday during which his tone was quite different than it was on Monday night. On Monday, the Liberal leader seemed like he had won another landslide, another majority government. But he was more, he had a different tone on Wednesday in his first news conference as re-elected prime minister. He said he's going to try to mend fences with the different regions of the country by reaching out. He says he's going to be in touch with people like Mr. Nenshi, the mayor of Calgary, and other Canadians to try to figure out a way to mend those fences. And what I thought was really interesting was back in 2015, he decided to form his cabinet just 2 weeks after Election Day. Now he's going to take a lot more time. He won't have his new ministers sworn in before November 20th, so in 4 weeks from now. So he's decided to take a lot of time, he says, to reflect on things. And I think, when you go from having a strong majority government like he enjoyed the last 4 years down to a minority government, you have a lot to think about.
Well, we see a lot of the familiar faces, like maybe Catherine McKenna, once again, climate change, environment. But I mean, she's been under attack quite a bit lately.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw what happened earlier this week in Ottawa. Her campaign office was spray painted with the word C in red. She reacted to that in an emotional way because it's not the first time she's been targeted. She was called by a fellow MP, if I'm not mistaken, many months ago. He labeled her a climate Barbie. Over the course of the summer, while she was out here in Ottawa at a movie theater, apparently somebody pulled up near her car and called and said, "F you, climate Barbie." She had a security detail following her everywhere. Yeah, those things shouldn't happen in politics. And I know Jagmeet Singh and other politicians reached out to her on Twitter saying, expressing their support and saying that this is something that should never happen in politics. Things have become very polarized in recent months, or certainly in recent years. There have been a lot of personal attacks by many people's accounts. This has been one of the dirtiest campaigns in Canadian history. So yeah, things should. I think we should call on people to. It's okay to be involved in politics, to be passionate about things, but let's not get personal here. Let's not get into personal attacks.
It makes for interesting times, definitely, when you're a TV journalist. Now, Ray, during the election, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said he was open to the idea of forming a coalition with the Liberals, but Trudeau said, "Oh, no thanks, we're good." Why is Trudeau ruling out a coalition?
Well, he's ruling out a coalition, I think, because he thinks that he can govern for a few years without one. No formal coalition means nobody from the NDP, for example, or any other party will be invited to sit in the Liberal cabinet for the next few years. And I think we're going to see this government being able to govern for more than just a few months because the NDP, they're broke right now. They barely had enough money to run the last campaign. And you saw that Jagmeet Singh didn't have a plane for a large part of that election campaign. He was campaigning by bus. So they're in no rush to trigger an election. I think that Mr. Trudeau can get along with some of the opposition parties. He can work with the Bloc. He can work with the NDP on environmental issues. He can work with the Conservatives to achieve things like the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. As a matter of fact, he said that's one of his priorities, TMX. So we're probably going to be speculating a lot as to whether or not we'll have an election sooner rather than later. But I get the feeling today that it's not going to happen anytime soon unless opinion polls start to show that Justin Trudeau could recapture his majority. In that event, he would probably be tempted to trigger his own defeat to have an election. But unless that happens, I think we're going to have a minority government for some time to come. And let's not forget, Hal, that the last two minority governments under Stephen Harper, they lasted 2.5 years each. So I don't think we're going to have another election anytime soon. But as you know, in politics, things can turn on a dime.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of the Tories, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer said he is staying on as leader, but Ray, will he be able to? Are there rumblings perhaps that maybe Peter MacKay from the Harper cabinet from a few years ago may be making a comeback? How about Rona Ambrose?
Yeah, there are rumblings behind the scenes. Of course, a lot of Tories are disappointed that Mr. Scheer didn't win a government because many Tories in his entourage thought on election day that it was possible, that they were going to pull it off. They didn't. And of course, Mr. Scheer can go around all he wants saying, we increased our seat count. We have an extra 20, 25 MPs. We got more votes than the Liberals. But at the end of the day, that's not what matters. You need more seats than any other party in order to be able to form government. And of course, that was a failure on the part of Mr. Scheer's team. And there have been a lot of rumblings. I've been on the phone the past 2 or 3 days talking to many MPs, especially here in Ontario and in Quebec, and a lot of people are unhappy. A lot of people think that there should be a new leader. In Quebec, they're very unhappy with the way Mr. Scheer managed the whole abortion debate. They think that his reputation is done for in that province. He'll never be able to win a sizable, more than a dozen seats. He won 10 in Quebec in the last election. So some people are urging for calm. They're saying, let's take a deep breath. Let's assess what went wrong here. Andrew Scheer is a good leader. We should seriously consider keeping him as leader. But there are a lot of people who think it's too late. He should have won this election. Given the fact that Justin Trudeau was weakened following blackface, so many controversies like the trip to India, SNC-Lavalin, it was really Mr. Scheer's campaign to lose, and he lost it, unfortunately for him. So we'll see what happens. He's going to have to undergo a leadership review this coming April at the next Conservative Party convention. In the meantime, he's going to have to face members of his own caucus. I was told today that meeting is likely to occur in 2 weeks' time on November 6th. So let's see what happens now. The one thing playing in his favor is the fact that we have a minority government. As I said, the election could take place anytime. If there's a leadership race, some Tories speculate that Mr. Trudeau might be tempted to trigger his own defeat to have an election ASAP. But, it's far from guaranteed that Mr. Scheer will be leading the Tories in the next election.
And what's interesting too is the amount of money in the Tory coffers compared to the Liberals and the NDP. The Tories have a lot of money, so trigger another election maybe 6 months or a year from now, and they could probably afford it. Now, Ray, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is also staying, but how can he, going from 35 seats in 2015 down to just 24 this time around? Wouldn't many people consider that a failure?
Well, yeah, they lost 20 seats. They lost a lot of votes when you compare their vote count to 2015. But the thing is, a lot of New Democrats thought that the party was facing annihilation. Things were going so badly for the NDP going into this election. The fact that they were able to save more than half of their seats is a big victory, which is why you saw Jagmeet Singh dancing on stage on Monday night in Vancouver before he gave his speech. He almost looked like he had just won a majority government, which is, of course, not what happened. But I haven't heard any rumblings on the NDP side over the past few days, and I've made phone calls as well. I haven't heard anyone openly calling for the leader's head. It looks like Jagmeet Singh is going to get another kick of the can whenever the next election comes. That being said, as I said, I don't think any New Democrat is looking for another election. I think that they're going to be working with Justin Trudeau's government. And let's not forget that Jack Layton, he had, I think, 3 campaigns before the Orange Wave in 2011. So I think he's going to get another kick of the can. Nobody is looking to replace him. He also ran a good campaign. Finally, his personality came through. A lot of people liked what they saw in Jagmeet Singh. He was, I think, the big surprise of this campaign. He became leader in October 2017, and for almost the first 2 years, he came across as a weak leader. While during the campaign, He came across as a strong leader. He seemed to be in good control of his files. He knew what he was talking about. So I think he's going to get another kick of the can.
Ray, let's discuss the People's Party of Canada, which failed to win any seats, including the party's leader, Maxime Bernier. Will the party even be around in a year?
Well, Maxime Bernier wouldn't answer that question, but he simply said that he's going to think about it. I don't foresee a good future for the People's Party of Canada. They, as you said, they failed to capture a single seat, which means in the next election campaign, Mr. Bernier will likely not be invited to any of the leaders' televised debates. I think it's probably the end of the road here for the PPC. It's really become a fringe party, and I really don't see a bright future for that party. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But Mr. Bernier is going on vacation, from what I understand, and he's going to be thinking about his political future and that of his party for the next few weeks.
Now let's read between the lines here of why the Bloc Québécois captured so many seats in Quebec. Ray, are Quebecers thinking of another referendum and a potential separation from Canada?
I don't think so. I think a lot of people in Quebec were disappointed in what they saw from Mr. Trudeau in the last 4 years. They were looking for an alternative. They didn't find Mr. Scheer inspiring. He scared a lot of people off with the whole debate on abortion that we had during the campaign. He said he wasn't going to reopen that, but he wouldn't answer for weeks. He wouldn't answer questions as to whether he's pro-life, pro-choice. So people didn't find any inspiration either in Mr. Singh. So they went back to their old reflex of voting for the Bloc, which is a party that stands to defend Quebec's interest. And the Bloc leader, Mr. Blanchet, also did a smart thing during the campaign. He decided to defend and promote the ideas that are being promoted by the most popular politician in Quebec right now, François Legault, the Premier of Quebec. He's got 60-70% approval rating. He's the most popular politician in the province of Quebec. He basically ran on his coattails, and it worked for him. So I don't think by any means that Quebecers have become more separatist by electing so many MPs. I don't think that the Bloc is coming back here in Ottawa in large numbers to promote sovereignty. I think that should there be another referendum in Quebec on independence, it's the PQ that's going to trigger that. And the PQ is nowhere near government right now. As a matter of fact, they're the fourth political party in the Quebec legislature. So it doesn't look like sovereignty is a thing again, in spite of what we saw on Monday night.
We're hearing a lot of separatist talk as well as right here in Alberta. I mean, tens of thousands of people joining Facebook pages, over 100, 150, 200,000 people. I mean, it's rampant right now, Ray. There's that huge disconnect, and a lot here in the West are feeling alienated from Ottawa. So what is Trudeau going to do to really set a lot of the mindsets of people out here in the West?
Yeah, Wexit seems to be more of a thing than Quebec separation rearing its head again. As I said, he said he's going to be reaching out to people in Alberta. He wants to speak to mayors, premiers. He's reaching out, we're told, to conservative politicians. He attacked on a daily basis during the campaign. Politicians like Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, the Premier of Alberta, Mr. Kenney. And I thought that was remarkable on the part of Mr. Trudeau to attack so many people during the campaign. As I said earlier, he branded himself as a person who unites Canadians in 2015. And he basically invited people in Ontario and Quebec to elect as many Liberal MPs they could to stand up to politicians like Doug Ford and Mr. Kenney, and also the oil industry. So that was really a total change of tone for Mr. Trudeau in the last few weeks. Quite amazing to hear. And now, obviously, as we said earlier, he's got to mend fences with all those people and people in the West.
Trudeau also raised a few eyebrows recently when he began his speech while Andrew Scheer was speaking on election night. Tell me more about that.
I've never seen anything like this, quite frankly. At some point on election night, we had three leaders, Jagmeet Singh, Andrew Scheer, and Justin Trudeau, speaking at the same time, giving their election night speeches. Mr. Singh was the first to speak. He spoke for a good 20-25 minutes. Andrew Scheer came on stage in Regina, and within minutes, you had Mr. Trudeau appearing on stage in Montreal to deliver his speech. So a lot of people never heard Andrew Scheer's speech because most of the networks cut to the re-elected prime minister. Apparently, we're told by conservatives that the congratulatory phone call that Mr. Scheer extended to Justin Trudeau was very nice, but I heard that some liberals were rubbed the wrong way by Mr. Scheer's people, who kept calling the Liberal leader's office saying the congratulatory phone call is going to come in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and it kept being delayed. So that, I'm told, could be one of the reasons why Mr. Trudeau said, you know what, Andrew Scheer is still speaking. I'm going to give my speech now because I'm ready.
Should make for some fun times on Parliament Hill, especially with that minority government. Let's see if they can play along well together. Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
You're welcome, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks for watching.